Welcome back. Today's video, I'm going to go back to basics and look at one of the fundamental building blocks of modular, which is how to use Boolean logic in your modular patches. What I really want to focus on today is how the Ornament and Crime, which you see here in my case, how it actually implements Boolean logic and how we can use that to make interesting modular patches. And this is the first in a series of many videos I'll be doing where I'm really trying to get back to the basic building blocks of modular, focused on Ornament and Crime, less focused on individual modules, more focused on techniques. So if you have ideas and suggestions for future, please leave them for me down below in the comments. Please hit subscribe, it keeps the channel growing and keeps you up to date with videos that I'm making. At its heart, Boolean logic is broken down into very, very simple operations that take voltages, generally 0 or 5 volts, which represent low and high signals, apply a function to them and produce an output, which again is either 0 or 5 volts or low or high. And that's all there is to it in the end of the day, and it's from these tiny building blocks that we actually have the computers we use today. We call them logic gates, and they're not a gate like you would think of it in a modular sense, but they're more little tiny processing blocks that perform very simple operations. For example, the AND gates takes 2 inputs and will only give a high output if both of them are high on the input. That means, in plain English, it will turn on its output only when both things are turned on the input, which is a great way, for example, in your patch, to have 2 things happen at the exact same time, trigger something else. Correspondingly, there's an OR gate, and an OR gate goes high on the output if either of the 2 inputs are turned on. So again, if one of 2 different things happens in your patch, you can make something else happen. These gates are great to combine with drum rhythms, for example, to create new rhythms to trigger a different sound or to create accents or ping a filter, for example. Then we have the NAND gate, and the NAND gate is actually one of the fundamental building blocks of digital logic in computers today. This is an AND gate where the output's inverted. So the NAND gate will go high in all of the cases where the AND gate goes low, but it'll go low when both of the inputs are high. And you can use this to detect, for example, if 2 things are happening at the same time and you want to stop something else. Then we have the exclusive OR gate, which is another fundamental building block. It turns on the output to high if one or the other, but not both, of the inputs are high. So for an exclusive OR gate, you would use it if you want one thing to happen or something else to happen. But if 2 things are happening at the same time, for example, like 2 drum hits are happening at the same time, you turn off the output. And finally, there's the NOT gate. The NOT gate just inverts its input. Now that doesn't seem like much, but it actually, when combined with the other gates, becomes a very powerful building block for complex patches. So let's take a look at how Ornament and Crime implements these, and we're going to make some musical patches, hopefully, along the way. In our first patching example, we're going to use the AND gates and the NOR gates. And what I want to do in this example is show you how you can use logic to turn on and off things in your patch. So I have a very simple drum setup here coming out of Squid Sample. And what I want to do is add a fill. And I want to turn on and off the fill, and I want to control it, say, using lapsus os. So we're going to use the AND gate for that. Now, the fill, I want to fill on, say, a very fast 16th. So I have that set up here on channel 2 on Squid Sample. So this is what it would sound like. Great. So we're going to keep that patched in there. Now I want that to come out of the AND input. We'll patch this output here, the 16ths, into one side of the logic gate. And then what I'm going to do is patch the output of the lapsus os here into the other one. When I slide this slider up, it goes up to 5 volts. So it becomes a high input, logic high, and now it's low. So let's take a listen. So I'm able to turn on and off my fills by simply using the logic of an AND gate combined with these inputs. Now, I also have this sound as well. Kind of another sound going, another kind of hi-hat. And I want, if I did the fill, it sounds like that. But what I want to do is I want to turn that sound off. In other words, whenever I have the fill going on, I want that sound to stop playing. So here, let's look at an example of how we can use a NOR gate to stop something from happening. So we'll patch the output here of lapsus os into this trigger on the right hemisphere, and the trigger pattern for that other sound here into that input. And now the NOR gate enables me to turn off this sound whenever I have my fill turned on. And you see now it's not playing. I might like the idea of maybe doing something crazy on the kick. So we would put the kick in there and we could do this and we could then patch it like this. And I can turn on and off the kick. Okay, now I have a Euclidean pattern programmed in on outputs 3 and 4. That sounds pretty good. Let's use that now with some logic to derive some additional triggers, which we're going to use to play some notes out of twin waves. So first of all, we can just go right ahead and patch this through the mult here, because I want to mult these two Euclidean sequences to send them into both those drum sounds over there, which you're going to hear. Let's move this cable back here out of the way. And we're going to patch them down here from the mult into our logic gate on the left hemisphere. And we've got an and an exclusive OR gate there. Now, let's take these cables here, and I'm going to first of all take the first output, and I'm going to patch it into trigger A here on Zadar, and we're going to use that to open up this envelope over here in Aikido. I'm just going to patch that in here. We're going to use Aikido as a VCA. We will take the output of the twin waves here, oscillator number 1, and just turn that down there, and I'm going to pop that into the input. The filter lights up, and I'll take the output of this notch here, and we'll pop that in there. And then for fun, we will just take the output of Aikido's mix and pop it into this delay, which right now Chronoblob is turned off. Let's take a listen to what we get. Now we get, I'll just turn the drums down. We got a nice kind of, we can get a little bit of rhythmic delay going on there. We get a nice kind of intermittent rhythm coming out of that. Okay, let's do a little bit more patching. I'm going to patch the second output here from the exclusive OR gate into this B channel on the Zadar. So now we'll hear that the rhythmic piece is also combined with some rhythmic filter modulation. And sure, you know, you've got lots of outputs on your Pamela's Pro workout or your Pamela's New workout, but eventually you're going to run out. So being able to derive additional triggers for other things in your patch, keeping it all in time with the main clock is really, really useful. We can also say play around with waveform manipulation on twin waves. And there's nothing stopping us playing around with the gate logic here and slowing down maybe this modulation curve. The point of this isn't to demonstrate twin waves, it's to show you logic gates in action. And I think that was a really good example of how you can use them to kind of create additional triggers for other things in your patch. Now, we're not limited to just using clock synced inputs to these logic gates here. Let's look at using unsynchronized or free running LFOs as well. So I'm going to take the output of these two free running square wave LFOs. They're bipolar, but that should work as long as they hit 5 volts. And I'm going to patch them into the two inputs here on the left hemisphere. And this straight away gives me some outputs that I can use. So you see there I have an OR and a NOR gate configured, which means they'll give opposite outputs and they won't play at the same time. So this is based on the relative speed of these LFOs, of course. And if I changed it to say an AND gate, we'd get a different rhythmic pattern. That's kind of cool. The only problem is they're obviously not in time with the clock. In fact, they're not in time with anything. They just keep free running. So to put them in time with the clock, I'm going to have to use an AND gate. I'm going to have to lose one of the outputs, unfortunately, because I only get one logical gate on this side. So let's patch that in there. I'm going to mult the clock from the master clock output here on the mult into the other side of the and we will patch in, say, this here. Actually, let's do the clap. So now the rhythm that you hear is the relative speed of the LFOs triggered by the gates. And that then is clock synced using the AND gate on the right hemisphere over here. Same concept also applies if we wanted to do this with, say, clock synced LFOs. For example, these LFOs I have over here on outputs 7 and 8 of PAMs. Now they're going to be relatively synced to each other, so obviously everything in PAMs is off a master clock. But we can use this to derive some fun new rhythms from the two LFOs. So again, we could just patch it in like this. And now you hear we're getting a very fun interplay between the different speeds of the LFOs. If we change the relative clock speeds, that generates a whole new rhythmic pattern. And there's a whole new rhythmic pattern again. Logic gates are great for this kind of stuff. And just playing around with different gate combinations and different rhythmic inputs, it's a great way to just create whole new rhythms. And you don't actually have to do very much, because by modifying the gates using the CV input here, if we set both of the gate, if we say set that one to CV and this one to CV as well, we're then able to modify the gates and change them on the fly in two different forms. So changing the rhythm up. Fortunately, it doesn't show on the screen what the gate is currently based on the CV, but I kind of wish it did that. So there's a few more examples of generating rhythms using logic gates in fun ways. Let's look at a different way of using logic, and with that we're going to use the compare and burst apps. Now what I want to do here is something a little different, which is why I brought the key step into play. What I want to do in this patch example is when higher notes get played, I want to send a burst if of gates into a hi-hat here, because I have the burst app set up to send 6 quick triggers into the squid sample to play a hi-hat. So let's set up the patch. The key step is going to do the driving here. So first of all, we're going to have a gate come out here into ZR to trigger an envelope there you see on the screen on ZR when I press a key. Next, I want to take the pitch information and I'm going to send that into the compare app and also mult it into the volt per octave input on twin waves. And I'll take the output of twin waves and we'll patch it into our filter. And obviously the filter is going to go into the envelope, and we need to have the envelope also coming from ZR, and that goes into a delay over here. So far, so good. Whenever a higher note is played on the keyboard, it'll exceed the comparison threshold here that I've set over here, which is actually quite low, and that output will go from here into the trigger for the bursts. Of course, I then have to patch the output here into the bursts, and now you hear the higher notes get triggered. So that's an example of how logic doesn't necessarily just only apply to logic gates. We can use different apps to trigger things. Now let's look at a slightly more complex patch which sends only the high-pitched notes to the delay, but the lower pitched notes go through the signal dry. And what I've done here is a little bit of clever multing. So the pitch information comes out on this yellow cable here. We compare it to a threshold. And of course, it goes into twin waves here to play the oscillator. If it's above the threshold, we send a gate into ZR into channel C here to send into this second VCA channel here on Aikido. And I'm just multing rather crudely the oscillator output into the first channel here on Aikido, as well as over here into the filter. Now, when this is playing, what I want to do is I want to toggle off playing the lower notes so that only the higher notes go into the delay. And the way this would work is, that's all the notes on the first channel on Aikido if I just play it. But if we just listen to the second channel and bring in some higher notes, pitch up here, and then we can bring in the delay. So only those notes are going to the delay. And now we hear the delay is only on the high notes, because sometimes low notes and a delay can muddy things up a lot. That's an example of how logic can be used with other applets in a rather complex looking patch using two applets, one for comparison, one for doing a logic gate, and combining it with a couple of other modules, a VCA being essential often when you're working with logic, to route audio in different directions depending on the pitch of the audio. Okay, for this next patch, we're going to do something a little bit fun. What I want to do is explore how we can delay gates and use inverse logic to add kind of dynamics to sound as you articulate it. Well, that's all very fancy talk to say, I want to mix in some white noise to the end of a sound as it plays. So here's my sound. The KXA case has a white noise source built in, so we could just plug it in there, and if we just opened up the VCA, we'd hear it. Now the problem with that though, is it plays the noise right over all the notes, and I only want the noise to come in just at the end of the notes. So obviously I want to control this channel on the VCA using an envelope. So I'm going to use channel C here, which I've set up on ZR to be a slightly slower, more curved VCA, which will open up in response to a trigger. But now if I just sent in a trigger, when I pressed a key, the white noise would come at the start of the sound. I want it to come at the end of the sound. In other words, I want it to come when the trigger or the gate coming out of this output here when I press a key is off. And to do that, I need to invert it. Now you would normally use a knock gate for that, but there's no knock gate in the Logic app on Ornament and Crime. But there's a quick hack for that, because as anyone who's done digital logic knows, if you use a NAND gate with the two inputs tied together, that turns into a NOT gate. You could also use a NOR gate or an exclusive OR gate. It doesn't really matter which one you use. The key point being is if you mult that gate input to those two inputs, it turns it into an inverse of what the signal is. So we'll just use this little mult here, which illuminates. You see the signal is high right now. When I press the gate, it goes off and then it goes high again. So now I can use this to trigger my envelope C here to create the white noise. Now you hear the little bit of white noise is introduced as I lift my finger off the key and the gate is inverted, opens up the other envelope and plays the white noise. But I'd like it to be a little bit later. So for that, I'm going to use the gate delay applet. All that does is delays an incoming gate by a certain amount of time. So I'm going to take that gate that we just generated, patch that in here, and now there's just that little delay, which I think is just a little bit more pleasant. Let's apply the same concept, but route that envelope to somewhere a little different. We won't bother sending in white noise. Why don't we modulate the filter a little bit? Now what I've done is I've just patched the output of the envelope into the exponential FM modulation input here on filter 8. And now that modulation envelope kicks in just a little bit after the note starts playing, and we can very easily adjust that timing, maybe give myself a little bit more time to sound out the note. And if I adjust this envelope over here that I'm actually using to articulate the note, move the sustain point back a bit in the envelope. There's just two examples of how we can use logic by using the NOT gate, in this case by using the NAND with the inputs multed, and some other gate manipulation like a gate delay to bring in different articulations of sound, be it white noise into the mix or changing a filter so that the filter only changes when you lift your finger off the keyboard. The TL Neuron applet is really the magic bullet here in terms of using logic in certainly in the hemisphere style where you can have two applets running side by side. And it can appear a little bit confusing at first, so I'm going to explain it using some diagrams. The idea with TL Neuron is there are three inputs, each of which is assigned a weight, and there's a threshold. If the sum of the weights exceed the threshold, then the output goes high. Pretty straightforward. But which weights get selected? Well, that's governed by the inputs. So if there's a high value on the first input, the first weight's selected. The second input is the second weight. Third input is the third weight. The way it works is trigger 1 and 2 correspond to weights 1 and 2, or circles 1 and 2 there you see on the screen. And CV1 corresponds to the third one on the bottom. You select and edit by just pressing and turning the knob. The weights can be negative, so they can offset each other, and that's where the magic comes into play. And you're going to see that in a few patches in a second. I'm going to use this little mult to just show the output, and we're going to use these inputs here, these three inputs from the lapsus just to send in voltages. So they're just very, very simple test case here. So what happens if I put the first one high? Well, we now know 3 is greater than 2 because 3 was triggered, and so the output goes high. What happens if the second one goes high? Nothing, because 2 isn't greater than 2, so we don't get anything. Similar with the third one. But if the last two are turned on, we have 2 plus 1 is 3. 3 is greater than 2, and so the output goes high. And that's the basic idea here. So I could set that to -2. Now let's have a look at what happens. So again, nothing happens here. Nothing happens here. We turn these two on, it goes high. But now if this one goes on, it goes off because 2 plus -2 is 0, plus 1 is only 1, and 1 is not greater than 2. So that shows how we could use negative inputs as a way to turn off or offset other inputs that are coming in. Okay, let's do our first simple example, which again was the AND gate. So we'll do a 3, a 2-input NAND gate, and so the threshold for both of them to be greater is 5. So if both of these inputs are high, the output is high, just like an AND gate, but if only one of them, we have no output. Okay, to put an AND gate into practice, I've set one up here to replicate what we did in our previous patches. We're just going to have a kick, and then we want to trigger the output here to play some hi-hats or clap sounds when this input goes high. So again, nothing particularly exciting there, but it shows that you can recreate basic gates in TL Neuron just like you had with regular logic gates. We can also create a NOT gate, and that's if you tie the two inputs together and assign them negative weights. So we'll turn this to say -3, -3, 0, and 5. And then for the output, I set it to -5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now when the input is low, the output is high. When the input is high, the output is low. Now let's look at some more advanced patching techniques using TL Neuron. And what we're going to do is take advantage of the fact that you can patch it back into itself to create feedback loops, and in doing that, record state. Now the first patch I want to show you is how to detect if a clock pulse is coming in. So I'm going to go in here to my left neuron and edit the setup so that this says 2, and we have 2 here on the second one, and sorry, that should be -2 on the second one. There we go. And 2 on the third one. And then the threshold is 1. Now what this will do is the clock will come in here, and we're going to pretend obviously that I can't do any of this with PAMS. You can easily generate a high signal when PAMS starts its clock, but let's pretend we didn't have that, okay? So the signal is going to come in here into the first input, And I'm going to take the output, and I'll use this little mult here so we can see the light up. I'm going to mult the output back into itself, into the third input. And then we're going to use this second input here from Lapsus as a reset. Now let's see what happens. When I hit play, the light comes on because the feedback loop locks the neuron on, and as soon as the clock stops, it stays turned on. And then we have to send it a reset signal to reset it. In this next example, which is my last example, it's a little bit more complex, and we'll use the neurons on both sides. What we're going to do is we're going to make a selector, a logic gate that can take two inputs and based on another input, choose which of the two it sends through. So it's kind of like a control switch. And to do this, we're going to be multing. So we're going to have to mult the selector, which I'll use this to select which of the two inputs are sent out the output. And I'm going to be sending in two different gate patterns, which we'll hear over here on the drums. Now we just mix the two outputs into a precision adder. Now, it doesn't matter that they're being mixed because they'll only ever be active at one time or another. And then we can take that and patch that into a drum sound over here. And now if we hit play, you'll hear that selector is on 0. So input number 1 is being selected. So you see this pattern playing. And then when I select input number 2, we're playing this pattern over here. And if you look on the screen, on the recording of the screen, you'll see the left TL neuron fires when I'm on 0, and the right TL neuron fires when my input selector is up on high. So that shows you how you can get really creative in terms of building logic using these TL neurons in a way that you really can't do with just basic logic gates, at least in how Ornament and Crime has them set up. Well, I hope you found today's video useful and you've learned a little bit more about Boolean logic and more importantly, how Ornament and Crime implements it. I've got another video planned in this series of Back to Basics where we're going to explore the Neuron app, which is a more complex logic processor in Ornament and Crime, so look for that coming soon. This is the start of a new series of videos I'm putting together, more focused on techniques and less on individual modules. So I want to show how Ornament and Crime in combination with other modules can be used in your patches. So if you have ideas or questions for future videos, leave them for me down below in the comments and I'll be sure to try and work them into a future video.